Hello class, today's lesson is going to be over the samurai and Japan's military society. And our target is quite simply, I can describe the military society of Japan. Now there are several parts to the military society of Japan. Before we can truly get into in-depth detail and actually talk about the samurai, we need to understand what happened at the end of the Heian period. Now we've been studying about the Heian and the Nara periods. The Heian period is where Japanese culture started to become more original. Less Chinese influences, more things that were unique to Japan. They developed their writing styles, their artworks developed. The Tale of Genji, the world's first novel written by a Japanese noblewoman named Lady Murasaki, was created during this time period. Now, one of the important things about the Heian period is the emperor no longer had supreme power. Powerful noble families controlled most of Japan. Groups of nobles were part of something called the imperial court, and they are the ones who advised the emperor, made the laws. They're basically in charge. Now, the nobles didn't all get along together. In fact, they fought constantly, and they had to use samurai to defend their land, stopping rebellions, defending themselves from rival nobles trying to take over their property. In 1180, a civil war was fought, and the most powerful clan or family in Japan was the Minamoto clan, and they were the ones who came out on top. Now, the emperor of Japan feared that the Minamoto family would take his throne from him. At this point, the Yamato clan was where the emperor still came from, and he was actually afraid that his family would be overthrown. So he did something interesting and unique. He didn't give up his power. He actually gave his power and appointed the head of the family, the Minamoto family, as shogun. And we're going to find out who that person was shortly. First, let's look at the Heian social structure. You have the emperor at the top. Now, the emperor owns all the land in Japan, and he would give away land to the nobles. Now, the nobles had to be loyal to the emperor. Now, during the Heian period, as the nobles grew more and more powerful, they held most of the land on their own, and the emperor was kind of more something called a figurehead. We're going to get into that a little bit later. Now, the actual Japanese word samurai means to serve, and the samurai, as you can see in this image to the right, are known for their swords and their armor. Now, the word Bushido it basically means way of the warrior, and it was the special honor code that the samurai followed. Among the ideas in this honor code is that they should be ready to die at any moment, and they had to have supreme loyalty for their master. Samurai who did not have a master to serve were actually considered something called ronin. They're kind of seen as scoundrels and not very good at their job, because otherwise somebody would have hired them to work for them. Now, in this image here, you can see this is taken in the 1800s. The samurai lasted in Japan for quite a while, but one of the common things about the samurai is this sword right here. Each samurai here has a sword. In fact, the sword was the status symbol of the samurai. In Japan, during the time period that we're talking about and later on, the sword eventually became so important to the samurai that they passed laws that nobody else could own a sword. Now, this sword is called a katana, and it is the popular Japanese longsword that I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. You see them quite often in the movies. Now, here in this image, you can see the samurai were not just swordsmen, they were also very good archers. In fact, the first samurai, the sword wasn't so important. It was their skill with the bow and arrow. Now, after the Minamoto clan took over, the emperor was still considered the top of the social structure. Now, all of Japan is changing. The old ideas of the nobles on top is pretty much gone. And the emperor, even though he was still seen as the leader of Japan, he was something called a figurehead. Now, a figurehead is just a fancy way of saying that he looks good, he looks like he's in charge, but he has no real power. He's not the one who's in charge of Japan. Now, when the Minamoto clan took over, the emperor appointed the head of the family as a shogun, and a shogun is basically just a general. They are the top samurai. since they're the general and the emperor appointed the shogun, and the shogun uses his military power to pretty much tell the emperor that he is now in charge. So the general in charge of Japan came from the samurai class. Now, lower level samurai, right below the shogun, were daimyo. Now, these guys are the landowners. Now, don't get them confused with the nobles during the Heian period. The daimyo were separate. These guys were generals as well. They were also samurai in charge of different armies. And as the shogun and the Minamoto clan took over, smaller clans loyal to the Minamoto would receive that land from the shogun. He would give land to the daimyo. And the daimyo were basically kind of like the not only generals, but they were the governors over this property. Now, the individual samurai warriors would serve the daimyo. Now, since they served the daimyo, they had to give that supreme loyalty to their master. And in return, the daimyo would reward with land, food, money, and other special things that the samurai may want, as long as the samurai was loyal to the daimyo. Now, last, at the bottom of the social structure were the peasants. These are everybody else. These are farmers, merchants, craftsmen. These guys are important to the culture of Japan because, of course, the military elite, the top people, they're busy fighting, running the government. You got to have the farmers to make the food, the merchants to sell things, craftsmen to make the tools, and for the samurai, their swords, their armor, plus everything else that they've got to make. But this totally changed the social structure. Now, this right here is just another list that shows you the different roles of the samurai. Now, the emperor, he's the figurehead ruler of Japan. He's got no power. Now, the shogun, he is the head samurai. He's basically a general, and he ruled Japan. And he always said that he ruled in the service of the emperor. He always paid special attention, making sure to say that, hey, this guy's in charge. But everybody knew it was really a shogun. Now, the daimyo, these guys are the military lords who owned land, and they served the shogun. Remember, these guys are samurai also. And then, of course, you got the lower level samurai who served the daimyo in return for land and food. As long as they were loyal, they received a stipend or a paycheck, whether it's land, food, or even money. So, just to recap, we have the shogun. The shogun is in charge. He is the general. He's above all the others, and he's also head samurai. Now, below the shogun, you have the daimyo. Now, the daimyo own land. The shogun gives the land to the daimyo, and the daimyo, they are also, what is that? Samurai. Now, when the daimyo would give land, food, money to the lower level samurai, samurai made sure to be loyal and serve their master. Keep these things in mind. The samurai in charge, the daimyo, the ones who own the land, and they would give land, food, money to the samurai. Now, one last thing before I forget. Since the daimyo own the land, they are also in charge of the economy. Trade, goods, money, all of this stuff, all the things that make a kingdom or an empire successful are being controlled by the samurai, by the shogun, by the daimyo. A small group of military leaders are in control of Japan. Now, this began at about 1180, 1185 AD at the end of the Heian period, and it lasted until the 1860s. And how did it end? Well, it's because of the United States. However, that's a lesson for another day. If you've got any questions,